perspective on critical issues. My name is Jules Dunham Howie, and I am your host, and I am excited because we have a phenomenal panel of women with us this morning. I'm going to let these lovely ladies introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about who they are. Won't you start first?
Hi, my name is Stephanie Smith. By day, I work as an assistant director in the Department of Planning in Baltimore City, focused on equity, engagement, and communications. But I also am campaigning to join the House of Delegates in the 45th District, which is Northeast East Baltimore City. I'm a wife, I'm a parent, I'm very passionate about public education and the product of public education, and I'm really excited to join these women this morning.
My name is Lisa Rodbian. I'm a public school teacher in Anne Arundel County and a former education law attorney. I'm also a candidate for the Anne Arundel County Council for District 6, which includes the entire city of Annapolis, the Annapolis Peninsula, and all the way up to Crownsville. And I'm very happy to be here.
Excellent.
Good morning. My name is Sandy Bartlett. I'm an attorney also, and I practice in the area of trademarks and copyrights. I have a small law practice in Laurel, Maryland. I also teach part-time at Anne Arundel Community College, where I teach business and law courses. And I am running for the Maryland House of Delegates in District 32, which covers Jessup, Linthicum, Severn, Glen Burnie, Maryland City, and Russet.
Hi, my name is Lenore Dawson. I am an administrator in city government. I am running for the office of clerk of the Circuit Court, Baltimore City. I'm also a mom to a wonderful 16-year-old who attends Polytech in Baltimore. I also own my own business, Mind Evolution, and I do a lot of community work.
Well, ladies, thank you for joining me at the table today. We've got three wonderful topics to talk about this morning. And our first one is about Des Linden, who is the first U.S. woman to win the Boston Marathon in 33 years. And so we're talking about hashtag Boston Strong this morning. So a little bit about it. Des Linden splashed her way through icy rain and near gale headwind to win the Boston Marathon on Monday, which was the first victory for an American woman since 1985. The two-time Olympian and 2011 Boston runner-up pulled away at the end of Heartbreak Hill to win in 2 hours and 39 minutes and 54 seconds, and it all counts when you're running a marathon. Yes. That was more than 4 minutes better than the second place finisher, who was Sarah Sellers, and one of 7 Americans in the top 10. What struck me about this story and what I want us to talk about is how Des Linden showed her compassion, and even through a compassionate moment, she still was able to win the race because she is very good friends with Shalane Flanagan, who's a 4-time Olympian and the reigning New York City Marathon champion. And she ended up finishing in 6th place, but she had to pop into the porta potty in the middle of the race before the halfway point, and she was falling behind the lead in the pack. And so guess what? Desi waited for her. She slowed up her run and said, I got you. Go handle it and come back. And she waited, and that helped them keep the pace. Yeah. And when you really understand, not only did it help her keep the pace, but Desi wanted to drop out. She was like, girl, I don't think I'm gonna make it. I don't know if I'm gonna be able to do this. And so they encouraged each other, and then out of that, Desiree ended up being able to finish first. Yes. So I thought this was a wonderful opportunity to talk about the sisterhood. Yes. At all times. What do y'all think about this great story?
Right. I think it's awesome. I think it's awesome, and I think it's indicative of women. We have our pacer car, as what I always say. I always say, different people especially with the campaign trail, I'm always saying, you're my pacer car. But I also appreciate the fact that we uplift each other, and we understand that there are going to be highs and there are going to be lows, and that's what it sounds like, Desi was experiencing, and I'm so glad that they were able to inspire each other for Desi to be able to go ahead and win.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that there's power in compassion and cooperation. Mm-hmm. I think that this is a clear example of when we work as a collective body, we can accomplish anything. Mm-hmm. And I think that so often in the society that we deal with the ego and the self so much, that we don't understand that when we actually assist others, we empower ourselves. So I'm excited. I love the story, and I hope that it will catch hold, and people will continue to pay this forward and to understand that I don't have to blow out your candle for mine to blow by.
No, that's right. What'd you get out of that, Lisa?
I just love that this draws attention to the other aspects of running a marathon besides just the physical aspect. And I think you can take that lesson to just about any task. So frequently we're focused on, the logistics of a task, the mind power required for a task, that we forget that things like emotional support can actually be huge, and apparently in this case, determining factors of success. So especially as a school teacher, I think there's huge lessons from this story, that not only, when we're working with children are we worried about content, we have to be worried about, the emotional needs. And this can expand to community context. Not only can we just look about logistical things, but really look at things more holistically. And I think that's one thing that tends to be a strength for women. So I think we should celebrate that this is a strength.
I agree. What do you think, Steph?
It made me think about public policy and how often we go, well, if someone had just lived their life perfectly, then the outcome would be great. And we all know that even with the best laid plans, we know that her friend prepared, she ate right, I'm sure she ran regularly so that she could be prepared for this race, but something happened where she needed to use the facility. And so it didn't matter all of that preparation, and so that's kind of how life is. Curveballs present themselves, things we weren't always anticipating, and I think that's what policy is supposed to be about, is that because life isn't perfect, how can we intervene in those moments of curveballs or those moments where things don't work out exactly as we planned, so that we can course correct and get everyone where we're all hopefully trying to go, which is to victory. Whatever victory means for us. In this instance, victory meant completing the race, right? Not even just winning. Completing that race is quite a victory, because then everyone who begins that race completes it.
That's exactly right. 26.2. That's
Yes.
a lot. That's a lot. I might be able to walk one. That's right. I don't know about that. But and for me, I had to reflect and say, would I have done the same thing? Would I have done the same thing? Because, when you're an athlete and you train and that's what you're trying to do, you can just get so focused on achieving the goal that you just push everything aside. And so I wondered, I wondered, would I be able to do the exact same thing? But it's a lesson for us because I think that you all hit it. When we work collectively and we show compassion for one another, then ultimately it can help us push through to where we need to go. Well, ladies, we're going to take a break, and then we're going to come back and talk about another topic. All right. Our next topic, and that is young people sue Florida governor to force action on climate change. # global warming fight by youth. So what is this about? A group of young people sued Florida Governor Rick Scott to force him to take action on climate change. The group of 8 young Florida residents, represented by an Oregon-based Our Children's Trust, sued the governor to demand that the state begin working on a court-ordered, science-based climate recovery plan. The group, which is reportedly made up of individuals ranging from 10 to 20 years old, is alleging that Scott is not taking steps to combat climate change. The suit says Scott and his administration have not passed any legislation meant to measure or curb carbon emissions. It also accuses the Florida governor and his administration of not doing anything regarding the threat of rising seas on the coast. And this is important because Florida continues to face increasing risks due to climate change, and by 2070, the streets of Miami could flood every day due to climate change, according to new research from NASA. In the past, Scott has said that he's not a scientist, and when questioned about climate change, he said that he previously voiced his support for President Trump's decision to withdraw the U.S. from the Paris Climate Agreement. Need he say any more? So what do you think about this new wave of youth-led activism on real-world issues?
Well, I'd like to jump in. I neglected to mention that I'm also an attorney and spent 6 years working on environmental health regulations, particularly clean air regulations. So this is something near and dear to my heart. I think that because climate change is obviously a global issue that is best handled by nation states, that it's unfortunate that we have a federal government that's inattentive to this issue and not particularly committed to advancing the cause of science. So in some ways, it's the collective failing of many generations of adults that have put this type of obligation in young people's hands, because they will be living with the adverse impacts of climate change into the future. And for any coastal state, let alone a state that's covered on three sides by water, I understand why they feel so concerned about how aggressive weather and all these things could really affect their ability to even stay in Florida, to even remain Floridians. So I think that young people are fighting not only for their own future, but for ours, even if we don't acknowledge it.
Yes. It becomes a matter of, while the grown-ups are fighting it out, young people are saying, okay, we've got to do something. And I can appreciate that. I love the proactive attitude that they have. And I love the fact that they're not accepting, you're supposed to speak truth to authority. And so they're not accepting just simply the fact that he says, I'm not a scientist, so we're going to let that rest, which I think is a poor excuse. For inactivity. I think it's a poor excuse. And also, they say, which I think is a unique argument, that they have a fundamental right to a stable climate. I love that they're making it a fundamental right. Yes, very smart.
Yeah.
Well, this story reminded me of a conversation I had with my son probably about 6 or 7 months ago. And something came across the television or the news about climate change. And he turned to me and he said, Mom, the issue is they just really don't care about us. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, the people who are making the decisions won't be here. They won't be around. I'll be here, hopefully, and my children. They just don't care about us. In the future, everything is about profit. Mm-hmm. And my son was 15 at the time when we had this conversation. Mm-hmm. So I think that a lot of our young children and young people are understanding that they have the power to step up and help to push and promote change. They understand what's at stake more so than some of us in terms of adults, and they care because I think we have children that are more evolved in terms of being more connected to the planet and understanding, and the bottom line is we depend on the planet to sustain our lives. Yes. I mean, that's the beginning and end of the conversation for me. Yes. We need it in order to exist, and to not be responsible and caretakers of the planet for future generations is just totally irresponsible. So this movement, as well as the others with young people, I'm excited about their passion. I'm excited that they understand that as a collective they have such a powerful voice and they can implement change. So I'm watching, I'm excited, I'm supporting, and I am certainly encouraging them to do their work.
Yes.
Excellent. Yes.
I definitely feel that this generation of young people really deserves a shout out of how amazing they are and how proactive they are being. Often they're maligned as, young people just stuck in their cell phones and video games and text messages. And maybe they are stuck in their text messages, but it's about important stuff. It's about taking action, about making difference for our world in ways that previous generations have let them down. And so that they are stepping up, have so much admiration for young people. As a teacher, I feel like I've seen so much compassion, even just the way that young people treat each other. Maybe it's the particular schools and classes that I have, but I'm very impressed at times with how compassionate and thoughtful this generation of young people. Do they have a name yet? They're not the
They're
millennials.
Z.
What are they called? Generation Z.
Yeah.
So I think we need to keep an eye on them and keep encouraging them because they'll help all of us.
And so that's a really good point, because there's a lot of people that push and say, we appreciate Generation Z, but they really shouldn't be engaged in this fight, because these are grown people's issues.
Can I push back there?
Please.
I think the irony is we're sitting here in April of 2018, so literally, 50 years after kind of the capstone of the civil rights movement. And, we think about the assassination of Martin Luther King 50 years this month. He was but 39. So, he would have been just shy of what we would term millennials if he were to be alive right now. He would just be 2 years older than the oldest millennial. And when you think about the 60s, by and large, it's a celebration of youth activism. But what I've found ironic is that the same people who championed youth activism have, in many ways, stymied successive generations of youth from standing up. It's like you want to be kind of saluted for standing up in your youth, but then there's no pathway for other people to give back in the same organizations or in the same ways. So I think young people realize if we aren't going to be given a seat at the table in some of these organizations that were begun by youth of old, then we're going to have to use social media, other platforms, even start our own organizations. I think in many ways they're not looking for a seat at the table, they're breaking the table or building their own table. And I think that is, they're really inheriting, kind of the activities of the past, but ironically not with much blessing to do so.
Well, I think we should join together and give them our blessing because I love it.
Yeah, I agree.
It makes some of the discouraging news maybe able to fade into what may be a very bright future with young people leading us and letting their voices be heard.
That's right.
Yes. I see the same at Anne Arundel Community College. I love the innovativeness. That's innovation. I see it with respect to because I teach in the business area, but just being innovative on how to use maybe older methods of protest or the standard method of creating a march, but getting the word out through social media. I mean, it is there, and there is so much for us to learn. Those of us who are not Generation Z, there's so much for us to learn, and it's reciprocal. There's so much that we can share as well. And what has happened is slowly, everything, unfortunately, change takes time, but slowly, I think we're going to come together as the community that we should be.
Well, I agree with Stephanie. I think that previous generations have just kind of dropped the ball in terms of being organized and standing up for justice and what's right, because you became very comfortable and complacent. And back when a lot of civil rights, prior to the civil rights movement and doing so, and even after, a lot of these protests started on college campuses. So they were the young people that actually, college students that actually helped to shift things in our society. So I support it, I encourage it. I think that we need to, well, I'm actually Generation X.
All right.
So not a baby boomer. So I think that we need to also become engaged with our children and support them and encourage them, give them platforms and give them tools to do their work.
Well, I think that we've got a work to do, and I know that everybody who comes to our table is all about reaching our hands out and figuring out how we can work together with anyone who's trying to uplift and build in a positive way. So, ladies, we're going to take another break, and we'll be right back. this morning, and it's about an 8-year-old boy at a school slashes other students with a knife. Hashtag school violence. So in Sioux Rapids, Minnesota, an 8-year-old student took a kitchen knife to a central Minnesota elementary school and randomly attacked 3 other children, recently, authorities said. Police Chief Perry Basie said the victims, ages 8, 9, and 13, suffered superficial wounds, requiring stitches in the attack at Pleasant View Elementary School in Sioux Rapids. No one else was hurt. The police chief said that he did not know why the boy committed this act. Why do you think there's such an increase in school violence with even younger students?
Well, having worked with children and adults who were victims of trauma and neglect and maltreatment, I think that a lot of this stems from trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Children innately are not violent, but a lot of times we don't understand, we don't have programs in place, we don't put funding into helping children and people who are victims of trauma to heal from that trauma. Because if you're in a situation where you're growing up in a household where your basic needs aren't met, you're not feeling safe, you may have suffered some domestic violence, you could have witnessed some community violence. I mean, there is an enormous amount of trauma that people suffer, and even micro trauma on a regular basis that we don't discuss and we don't talk about, and we don't give these kids tools to heal.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens is, say they witness community violence, they saw their neighbor get shot. The next day they're told, okay, suck it up, go to school, and you're expected as 8 to sit in class.
Mm-hmm.
This child, the first thing I say is you never know someone's story. So when we see someone at 8 years old who's actually acting out in such a violent manner, the first question that we should ask, what violence was perpetrated upon this child?
Mm-hmm.
Because when we don't have those conversations and we don't get to the root cause of this behavior, which quite often is trauma, then we're missing the mark. And then what happens, the children get older and the crimes become more severe, and then they get caught up in the juvenile justice system a lot of times, and that's just a whole life trajectory that we don't want to have these children subjected to. So we have to start putting money and funding into real trauma-focused care and helping to go into these homes and assist these children and help them before we can expect them to learn.
You know, I agree with your comment about trauma. And I do think that is indicative of how we are as a society. It's what we hear about, and I agree with you about micro-trauma. I think that, you know, there was a movement to sort of protect our students or our children from so much violence. I don't know really what happened to that. It seemed to die down.
Yeah, you're right.
And it was an aggressive movement. And then somehow we got into, I guess, a free speech argument, and so it died down. However, I think that there is a level of, and as you said, your son was saying, you know, they're not looking out for us. I think this still goes back to that the children expect a level of protection that they don't necessarily receive. And unfortunately, the schools used to be a place of fun and of a place where you can be a child and it was safe.
Yes.
And somehow we've got to figure out how to create that environment again. I think that is a part of what March for Our Lives was about, is that we want this to be a safe environment, and they spoke out and said, we are okay with being children.
Yes.
Make it safe for us.
Yeah, I think, you know, just to piggyback on what Lenora mentioned, a school is in a community, right? So it is a community, but it's in a larger community. And I think that sometimes we're forgetting that even if the school has really done all it can to be welcoming, warm, even decorated nicely, if I have to walk through an unsafe community or transport myself through an unsafe community to get to a school, I think we have to assess all the things that are going to be faced by a young person before they enter the door, because they're carrying all of those interactions into that school. And I think particularly in the urban context, a lot of young people feel unsafe simply in the riding on public transportation and then walking. So before they've hit the school door, they have been affected by people that have nothing to do with providing them education. So again, when it comes to the teachers and the staff that are inside the schools, they definitely need to be given all the resources to provide a trauma-informed response so that they're not simply stigmatizing someone as being loud or disruptive, but really being given the resources and the time to better assess what is kind of triggering the sets of behaviors they're interacting with, because this could really be the difference between someone being able to continue their education and ending up in the school to prison pipeline. Is all of those interactions in school being infused with not only compassion, but really the skills of providing a trauma-informed response to a young person.
I think it's really important to mention that schools on the whole are lacking resources that they need to really support students. I know, for example, in Anne Arundel County, we have school counselors who have caseloads with 700 to 800 students. And that's basically one counselor for an entire school. The National Organization for School Counselors recommends about 1/3 of that, maybe 250 maximum. So when we're talking about making sure that we have resources in place to support young people, especially young people who have experienced trauma, we need to make sure that those resources are in place at the schools, because that is probably the community place that gives them the most interaction, or with which they have the most interaction, and where they have the possibility of receiving the most support. So, you can take good steps in the school, but without I know Anne Arundel County has a movement to infuse restorative practices and restorative justice, which can make an impact for children like this 8-year-old boy. However, without additional staffing, you're going to still be limited on what you can actually do to support. So I would encourage people across the country to consider how much they're supporting their public schools.
Right, and Lisa and Stephanie, you both said funding, and I think funding is very important. I also think that it's great to have some of the, if we could have more of the activities, the extracurricular activities. I think the funding, definitely with respect to the teachers, because I think those numbers that you just gave us, Lisa, are horrific. But I think that, we've taken out a lot of the extracurricular activities where there also was a form of a sense of just creativity and other ways to express yourself when you have emotions and things of that sort. And I think that also, we need funding for those programs as well.
And critically for transportation,
Yes.
for students to
Yes.
participate.
Yeah.
It doesn't help if you have the programs, but students that don't
Right.
have a way
Yeah.
to get home can't participate.
Right.
Well, as you can see, this topic, we could go on and on, because it's really a critical conversation. And so we're going to come back to the table, I think, at another time and continue this issue about school violence, because the one thing that I hope you all notice, this was in Minnesota. And this is a community that you wouldn't see violence. You wouldn't think you would see violence in. And so this issue is pervasive all across the country, and there's still a mighty work that we have to do. Well, ladies, our time has come to a close. It goes so quickly. It really does when we're having good conversation at the table. And y'all are just wonderful.
And we always do with you, Jules.
Well, thank you. You're so kind.